Do you know the other presenters?
No, no, no.
No be your show, no be that. Aquachi, daily Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi, one man, Osinachi, Aquachi, daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Okay. I would pause the video so you can speak to them.
Hi.
They can they will hear it from anywhere
Oh,
you are.
I thought you were calling me to
No,
call.
no, no, I said you can speak.
Okay. In the Rango. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good afternoon. Please, can you tell me how to properly pronounce your name?
Ndirango, you are right. You are not wrong.
In the Rango and your last name?
Gonjiri.
Gunjiri. In the Rango, Gunjiri.
Ndirango, Ndirango is my name. Gonjiri is my surname.
Okay. In the Rango, Gunjiri.
Right.
The Rango, Gunjiri. Thank
Right.
you.
Mm, okay.
What's your name?
Imushe.
Imusha.
Yes.
Do you want me to give you my name for it?
You can't.
Or you will use your
No, give me your phone. Do you have any video in your presentation? Any
No.
sound? Okay, it's fine.
I don't know if the other people do. I don't know if the other people do.
If they do, it will still listen. Okay.
So do you want me to come take that speaker thing and put it on the mic?
If you speak from there, they'll hear you. Yes. You have 1 minute.
I don't see any attendance. It is zero, is it? Zero.
Not
Okay, there's one more final.
for when to join.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. Hi, Nyoma. Oh, she's so connected to audio. Hi, Nyoma.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Am I saying your name properly?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So it's Nyoma Onyinyebuchi. Can you pronounce your surname for me, please?
It's Nama Onyinye Onwebuchi.
Nyoma Onyinye and
Onwebuchi.
Onyebuchi. Okay.
Onwebuchi.
Onwebuchi. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Onwebuchi. Okay. It's time. Okay. You want us to Can we? Okay. Just sorry. Before you open this, is everyone's presentation ready? And Nyoma, would you be sharing your screen?
No, I won't.
Okay. Durango, would you be sharing your screen?
Yeah, I can share, although I've shared the PowerPoint with the secretariat. But it's
Okay.
okay, I'll be sharing.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. We are going to get started. Does anyone have any questions before we start, or are we good to start?
Sorry, we are doing 15 minutes or 10 minutes presentation?
So we have 90 minutes. So it's going to be 20 minutes for each of us, and then the rest of the time is going to be for question and answer.
That's fine.
Yes. So we'll each present, and then at the end, we will take question and answer. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine by me.
Okay.
I'm okay
Thank
with
you.
that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to our panel on African queer identities. My name is Oyinda Malalaka. I go by Oyinda, and I'm going to be chairing today's panel. We have 3 panelists today. 2 are joining us virtually, and I'm here in person. And we're each going to take turns presenting. I'm going to go first, and then next we are going to have Devangu, who's going to present next, and then lastly, we're going to have Nyoma, who would be presenting. Each presenter is going to take 20 minutes to present first, and then at the end, it would be time for question and answer. So if you do have questions, please write them down, and we will take the questions at the end of the session. And just to check that you can hear me clearly online, correct? Yes, I'm gonna assume that's a yes, if there's no. And everyone can understand and hear me. Perfect. Okay, awesome. And please remind me, Imushe, I will let you know when to go to the next slide. Okay, awesome. Okay, good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Oyinda Malala, and I go by Oyinda. And today I'll be presenting a preliminary work that I've been doing. I did for my master's, which is titled Drag as a Vehicle for Socioeconomic Mobility, a case study of Nigerian youth, social media influencers, and the neoliberal queer identity. And you can go to the next slide. For this project, I set out to answer the question on how does drag social media influencing, as practiced by icons like Bobrisky, serve as a pathway for social economic mobility in Lagos, Nigeria, and what implications does this have for youth economic survival and the neoliberal queer identity in a social-politically oppressive environment like Nigeria. So first off, I'd like to start by introducing drag. So what is drag? Drag is an art form that involves individuals, often referred to as drag queens or drag kings, and it involves dressing in exaggerated clothing and makeup to entertain audiences. Drag is often done through lip singing or dancing. It's often comedic in nature. It often involves skits, and it's always associated with queer people, so that's the LGBTQIA plus communities. And drag has been done historically to challenge traditional gender norms. Drag is political in nature and it is anti-capitalist in nature, and drag has been mainstreamed in the last decade by people like RuPaul through TV shows like RuPaul's Drag Race. Next slide, please. So for this research, I chose to use Bobrisky, whose legal name is Idris Okunaya, as my case study. And I chose to use Bobrisky given that Bobrisky has been a drag social media influencer for over a decade in Nigeria. So Bobrisky has been on the scene since 2014, and she has over 5 million followers on Instagram, and she's had a decade-long career. And so that helps us understand the viability of this career option for trans Nigerian influencers. Instagram is also the platform that I'm choosing to focus on for this work. Next slide, please. So in Nigeria, to understand the precarity of this career options, in Nigeria, we have the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act of 2014. And through this, it means that anyone who identifies as queer could be prosecuted under criminal law, and that means they could serve prison term. And through this, we understand that Bobrisky functions in a legally transphobic and homophobic country. And this also helps us understand the context and the precarity of Bobrisky's situation as a trans woman living and working in Nigeria. Next slide, please. Also in Nigeria, we have a lot of unemployment. So for example, the youth unemployment rate is 42.5%. That's almost half of the population. And then also in a 2023 survey by Queer City, found of this small sample size of participants that participated in the survey, 50% of trans and gender diverse Nigerians who participated said that their gender identity had led to missed job opportunities, while 29% were unemployed. So this shows us that it's already a struggle for many queer Nigerians to find employment and find a job. Bobrisky also lives in Lagos, which is why Lagos is important in this context, because Lagos has rebranded itself to become Africa's Silicon Valley. And this has meant that entrepreneurship through gig work and platform economies are being pushed as a solution to unemployment and underemployment. Next slide, please. So one of the theories that I engage with, especially given the urban context of Lagos and how Nigeria is trying to rebrand itself as a whole, is Owambe urbanism by Grace Adeniyi Oguyaki. And Owambe urbanism helps us understand the complexities of queer commodification and consumerism in relation to employment and economic survival in urban spaces. Owambe urbanism becomes a form of response to the failed notion of urbanism in Lagos, and it helps us understand the next theories I engage with are theories on rainbow capitalism and camp capitalism. And those help us understand the commodification of queer culture, which is happening here. So rainbow capitalism helps us understand the commodification process that reduces queer identities, for example, in the situation, drag culture, into marketing strategies. And then camp capitalism helps us understand the impact of the televisation and commercialization of drag as an industry, including the dangers of how this industrialization blurs the line between performance and reality. Next slide, please. The other theories I engage with are also theories on platform capitalism and gig economy. And both of these theories help us understand how platform-enabled gig economy in the African context is a race to the bottom where work is temporary and precarious with no legal, financial, or economic protection. Next slide, please. So given that Bobrisky operates on Instagram, we have to also understand the Instagram economy. And the Instagram/creator influencer economy exists thanks to the platform ecosystem that we have in the world, but also on the African continent. And what we've seen worldwide is an increasing emergence of Instagram influencers who monetize their influence on the platform with vehicles like paid promotions and advertisements. And because of this nature of influencing, influencers are gig workers. And so as an influencer, Bobrisky operates in this influencer economy. So traditionally in platform economies, for example, Uber, the platforms tend to be the main players in these economies. But in contemporary platform economies like the Instagram economy, both the influencers and the platform giants are players in this economy, and they both exploit the systems for capital gains. The Instagram economy on the African continent is specifically unique because it requires engaging in and promoting neo-colonial beauty standards, such as skin bleaching. And this is one of the beauty standards that Bobrisky engages with, because Bobrisky also runs a skin bleaching business and also engages in skin bleaching herself too. Next slide, please. So how exactly does Bobrisky profit from the Instagram economy? So one of the struggles that I had with this project was that the influencer economy on the African continent or in Nigeria is really understudied in terms of the numbers of the economics of the industry, the viability of the industry, or how much influencers are charging. There's no industry standards, and so because of that, there isn't a lot of data on the numbers of the viability of the industry. But we can make some approximations based on the data that is available, as the other currency in the platform economy is data. So as mentioned, Bobrisky has over 5 million followers on Instagram. And as of January 2024, the potential advertisement reach for Instagram in Nigeria is 12.5 million Instagram followers. Sorry, 12.5 million Instagram users. And so if we were to take a quarter of Bobrisky's 5 million follower counts, that would be 1.25 million followers. And we took those numbers and we put them in relation to the total advertisement market share for Instagram in Nigeria, we can kind of make some assumptions on Bobrisky's potential advertisement market share in Nigeria if you were to assume that all 1.25 million followers of those resided in Nigeria. So if we made this approximation, then that would mean Bobrisky will be earning 9.92% of the total advertisement market share for Instagram in Nigeria. And this is equivalent to 9.6% of total internet users in Nigeria. And if Instagram received $1 revenue for each of their advertisement market share in Nigeria, then that would mean that Bobrisky could potentially be earning 9.9% of each dollar that Instagram is using. And Instagram's current ad reach is equivalent to 5.5% of the total population in Nigeria, to help you put these numbers into perspective. So another thing that we also learned from Bobrisky, if you were to Google Bobrisky's name on Google right now, the generated search results would be over 1 million per 0.7 seconds when it comes to keyword search. And so every time you search Bobrisky's name or you engage with Bobrisky's content, whether it be on Instagram or Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, you engage in a process known as datafication. And datafication can be understood as transforming everyday life into quantifiable data through system tracking and information digitalization. And datafication is a currency needed in Instagram economy to convince brands to pay ad dollars. So every time Bobrisky creates content and people engage with it, they help create the data that Bobrisky needs to convince brands to pay our advertisement dollars. Can you please go to the next slide? So for example, in the only information I could find about how much Bobrisky charges publicly was in 2021, in an interview, she claimed to charge 50 million naira per post. And that 50 million naira is above the minimum wage in Nigeria, even at that time or in this present age. And if we assumed at that time, Bobrisky's followers was definitely not up to 5 million followers. And at that time, she was charging 50 million naira per post. If we assume she was still charging 50 million naira per post, even in 2024, that still puts her at above the minimum wage and above the average salary for the average Nigerian living in Lagos or living in Nigeria. And if she were to do one post per month and charge 50 million naira per month per post, that means she's earning over 50 million naira per month just for one post. Now, to get this engagement, there are techniques that Bobrisky needs to do to get this engagement, because again, this engagement is how she gets the ad dollars at the end of the day. And sorry, ad nairas. One of the techniques that Bobrisky uses to get engagement is rainbow capitalism, which is what we can see in this picture here, where we see Bobrisky talking about her gender transitioning process. And she's using this opportunity of gender transitioning to to advertise a skincare brand and get ad dollars for that skincare, because clearly the skincare company has paid Bobrisky to promote their brand on Instagram, and Bobrisky knows what's going to get attention and get Nigerians talking. So therefore, by using her gender transitioning process to promote a skincare brand, Bobrisky is engaging in rainbow capitalism and also camp capitalism by using queerness as a commodification process. Next slide, please. The other technique that Bobrisky uses is also rage farming. So for example, by using captions like this, insinuating that a billionaire sponsors her lifestyle and then tagging a fashion brand in it, she knows by talking about a billionaire, it's going to get a lot of Nigerians talking and going to bring attention to her post. So because of doing things like this, like rage farming, using rainbow capitalism, Bobrisky is engaging in Owambe urbanism. And Owambe urbanism requires the embodiment of being a trendsetter. And posts like this create rage amongst Nigerians, which in turn brings in post-engagement data for Bobrisky. And this data is what Bobrisky needs to convince brands that she's able to get the attention and bring the attention to the brands so that she can get capital gains. Next slide, please. So now that we know what Bobrisky does for economic survival, what does this mean as a trans woman living in Nigeria? Because again, in Nigeria, we have the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act. And even before the act, a lot of queer people were always discriminated against in Nigeria. So in the book, Love Offers No Safety, Nigeria's Queer Men Speak, an underlying theme was the role of economic class in the experiences of homophobia and societal acceptance. And one of the narrators in that book stated that, I am relatively, and I quote, I am relatively free in this caged country because I have wealth and status. Once you have that, no one can bully or stigmatize you for being bisexual. So with this, we can sort of draw a conclusion that a queer Nigerian's economic status plays a role in their experiences of homophobia in a country where homophobia is socially and legally accepted. Next slide, please. Well, that was the case for Bobrisky's run until Bobrisky was arrested this past April for abusing Nigeria's currency. This law that Bobrisky was charged for, she was a first-time offender, and it's a very vague law that is imposed whenever pleased. And when other people have been charged under this law, they've been given the option of paying a fine, but Bobrisky was not given the option of paying a fine. Instead, Bobrisky was sentenced to 6 months in prison in Kirikiri, and Bobrisky was put in the male section of Kirikiri. And let's not forget that Bobrisky is a trans woman, so this also puts her in a place of danger. And ever since Bobrisky has been arrested, the Nigerian government has released many homophobic and transphobic statements about Bobrisky. I and many have argued that Bobrisky was only arrested to be scapegoated for rebelling against the traditional gender norms in the Nigerian system. And Bobrisky was also scapegoated for creating new realities for many queer Nigerians. Next slide, please. So far, I've kind of showcased what it means to be a trans social media influencer. But what are the implications of this career path for youth economic survival and a neoliberal queer identity in a social-politically oppressive environment like Nigeria? So in the case of temporary survival, it is a viable option because it gives possible access to economic elevation. Again, as we can see through Bobrisky, she's been able to have a 10-year run, and she's been able to acquire all this amass of wealth. She's been able to go through grass to grace. And in Nigeria, we love the grass to grace story. That's the Nigerian dream. And Bobrisky has been able to showcase this Nigerian dream with this career path. But there are also a lot of barriers to entry with this career path. Like, for example, there is need for high access to social capital. There's need for high access to human capital. There's also cost of operations, like having the latest devices, having constant connection to internet, having to wear designer brands, and many more. And then there's the mental health cost of being an influencer. So gig work itself is already isolated because you're many times working by yourself. But being a trans gig worker, a trans influencer, you're also putting yourself in line for homophobia, transphobia at a heightened race. And so it becomes an issue because your mental health becomes a cost of this job too. As we've also seen in the case of Bobrisky, success is neither guaranteed nor is it permanent. Can you please go to the next slide? In this role, success is not guaranteed or neither is it permanent. Just because you follow the certain formulas to being an influencer doesn't mean that you're actually going to gain the success or the wealth that you need. And then the other issue with this is having to sell identity as performance. In Nigeria, we already operate under many homophobia and transphobic ideologies. And when drag is done as a performance for public consumption, it takes away from drag as political, it takes away from drag as an identity. And it becomes this thing where people think it's just an act that you put on whenever you want or whenever you need for economic gains. And it takes away from the core historical nature of drag as this anti-oppressive, anti-homophobic movement. So therefore, this also creates this perception of queerness. It further perpetuates the idea of queerness not being African, and then creates this idea that queer people are not African and they're Western, and they're only doing this to gain attention or to gain economic gains or social capital. And as seen again, visibility and economic status, in the case, as we see in the case of Bobrisky, doesn't always translate to protection. So just because you amount all this class of wealth doesn't necessarily mean that you're protected from homophobia or transphobia in the public. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, as shown through the precarious situation of Bobrisky, drag social media influencing is a band-aid solution to the economic survival of queer Nigerian youth. For temporary economic survival, of course, it can be an option to survive the day-to-day in the present, but it lacks the longevity or the structures in the long term to survive the unstable economy and the transphobic or homophobic economy in Nigeria. Thank you. Okay, awesome. So next we are going to move to Derangu. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Awesome. Please welcome Ndirangu Kunjiri. And Ndirangu is a doctoral fellow at University of Nairobi with research interests in inequality and poverty, cybersecurity, entrepreneurship, economic growth, innovation, national competitiveness, international trade, and productivity. And you're going to have 20 minutes to present. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I request, are you able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Chair, for this. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending from where you are. As introduced, my name is Ndirangu Kunjiri. Currently, I'm a PhD fellow at the University of Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you. I'm coming from Nairobi. And today I'm looking at the topic on perspective on lesbian, gay, transgender, and position on this orientation and how are they perceived by their families, and more so in Kenya. That's where I'm taking from. And start us off in my introduction. Over the decades, we have seen that human rights have established resilient about the relationship between become more increasingly integrated in development, whereby human are more social and human rights are more established now, and we're able to recognize different kind of human rights that have not been recognized there before. And we have realized that LGBTQ and how have been recognized in some countries in Africa as one of the human rights that we need to recognize globally, as the Western has done. Although we have some countries like Uganda, where it is already imposed a death penalty. The same, some countries like Kenya, we don't have any law on it, although it's not practiced, but it's good. But when you go to Africa, other countries in Africa, South Africa, it is already recognized as one of the human rights we have in this perspective. That's why I'm now to look, how do the families, when one is LGBTQ, when you come out to your families, how do your families perceive you? And that's what I'm looking about. And we find that there's a violation of the strength of protection of human rights that need to be there, because we create a condition that is vital for sustainable development, because we find some of these LGBTQ people, they are part of our employee staff, they are brothers, sisters, and one or the other, they affect such development in our countries and in our families. Kenya members of the public that have been attacked in the past. For example, we have one of the LGBTQ person was killed in Eldoret last year, but one. And also we find that health workers and anyone that has seen serving these kind of people in these communities not well taken care of. These human rights abuse against LGBTQI include substances like intimidation, discrimination, even in the churches, in mosques, and whatever. And also there's forced execution, for example, the area you live in, you're evicted from there. There's violence, as I stated in Edward, someone was killed on that. And also there's collective rape happen, and also there's physical assault. And sometimes we have death occurring due to this. When somebody come out and declare the position. What our objective of this study? The first objective is to determine the influence of social democratic on the awareness of the LGBTQ rights in people in Kenya, and also to identify the trend of using raising awareness of the LGBTQ people in Kenya, and finally to explore whether the resulting awareness has impacted in advancement of LGBTQ rights in Kenya. What is the impact of the awareness being made when a person declares the status? What is the outcome of the result of this? Why are we doing this study? The first thing we are doing this study is critical to broaden and advance the knowledge creation and more so on LGBTQI rights in Kenya and more so in Africa, and also understand what trends and approaches these people use and the LGBTQ rights we're able to understand, and finally identify and investigate and document most of the trends of the LGBTQI awareness and the rights awareness in Kenya, and how has it evolved over the years up to where we are today. The majority of the study focused more on creating the rights of LGBTQ people. The study period was between 2017 to 2022. And the study used the most sort of longitudinal sample, where sample was 55 years and above in 5 countries from the survey to examine the age trend of the socio-economic inequalities in the health of the LGBTQI people. Using growth curve models, individual trajectory, and more so the self-related health and physical functioning, we are able to analyze and measure through what we call health and the income and the education of these people, and see from the education and the income and education level what is the impact and when they come out to perceive their role. And also we made use of the available digital. Yes, we had used some secondary data, some data was available in a secondary format to be able to use this data. And other study, we use what we call mixed research approach to design, also can be able to get some of the quantitative and qualitative research designs, and also get more inclusive data on our study. The queer theory and the human rights-based approach theories were used and are able to inspire the fighting of the social injustice and inequalities of the LGBTQI people. The combination of the primary and secondary data collection method was used. The secondary data mostly used, we came from the internet source, case research, and also historical research and desktop and library research was made. And primary data we made a personal interview and also some observation techniques. For example, in Nairobi, we were able to visit some of the clubs, we were able to visit some people who are LGBTQI in their families, and also able to see how are they able to relate to their families. And also we had some focus group, more so a focus group was the people practicing homosexuality and people practicing lesbianism, more so in the prostitution viewed. And also we had the survey research. We did a survey which was done online to different criteria of those who are practicing and those who don't practice. And this we used to collect the data for our study. In our finding, we're able to fight to see that the general experience of creating awareness of LGBTQI person in Kenya is progressing a bit rather slowly, because we find in Kenya due to lack of the law, so this is getting very slowly. 94% of our respondents attributed the increase in LGBTQI matters to both the mainstream and social media. So mainstream media and social media are able to come out and able to make the awareness of the LGBTQI. And also among the LGBTQI people in Kenya, we came to realize we have an association, although it's not registered, and also we had the Supreme Court in Kenya gave an assurance that LGBTQI people can be able to register their association in the country as a non-governmental organization. LGBTQI people in some areas reported has been harassed, more so in some of the higher middle end areas, and assaulted and more so extorted money by the gangs. When you go to in the streets, when you go to those slum area, this is where we came to realize harassment has been there, as I said. But when you go to our head estate, harassment and assaultment is not there in the estate. The society today is more aware and more accommodating for the person. We find that as we grow as a country, as an African continent, we are able to accommodate every person as we grow on. And this one area we see that the human rights awareness has been there, which has been made by various stakeholders. Media was used to propagate the stereotypes of against LGBTQI. In the past, we find that we had a lot of bullying that came out, but we find that through the media, the mainstream media, and social media, they have been able to propagate this kind of stereotypes, and we have find that come out to get more awareness with this. And some of the family have been able to respond in a positive way to their families and also their siblings who are part of the LGBTQI community. And also responding to the awareness through the mentioned by the public figures, such as you have some political figures, religious leaders, and some of the celebrity figures in the country and in the continent. They're part of this movement. So this make the awareness to go up, and also and also we find that they are accepted in the society is more because of what is there in the people involved in it. And also books and literary materials are used. For example, you find in our primary schools in Kenya and other part in Uganda also and Rwanda, where the children in grade 6 and grade 5 they're being taught about education and sexual matters. This makes more awareness to the children and also make more awareness to other people in and the parents at the same time. In our conclusion, we're able to conclude that the lack of awareness on the LGBTQI issues within Kenya population at large has been there in the past, and also it's there. We find, especially in the rural areas, the awareness is not there. The crime against the LGBTQI person vary from the violence to FGM and also forced marriages to murder. So we find that some of these are, especially for the girls, have been forced to marry. And also we find that we've been having murder and the FGM has been practiced because they believe through FGM, they're able to reduce the growth of LGBTQI people community in that area. The violation further promoted by the countries and the defendants to join cause with the rest of the LGBTQI. For example, when you have a cause in South Africa, other people, the community in other part of the continent, they're able to come out to fight and support their community in South Africa and other countries. In our recommendation, they recommend policy reforms as a country, as a continent. We need to have policy reforms and where can recognize LGBTQI as a human rights in our continent and come out clear as a country and say which was our stand. Because, for example, if in Kenya, we don't have a stand as we stand for now. We don't have a law. We don't have a policy that is able to control this and regulate this. And also, we require continuous advocacy. We find that in Africa, we find that most of the advocacy is done by the Western, so we can have our local advocacy because joining LGBTQI is a personal issue. It's not a gene issue, it's a personal issue, it's a personal decision. So continuous advocacy needs to be done. So whenever one person is making a decision, it should be aware what decision they are making. And also we need to have a strategic litigation, fine, because lack of litigation because in this community, the community members have been suffering a lot due to lack of litigation. And also we don't have lawyers that they have the lawyers that have the skills to represent them in the court of law. The challenges, we find one of the challenges is that the research on LGBTQ matters in Kenya is not well appreciated. And also not only appreciated, we find most of getting the information from this, despite having taking the oath of secrecy. We find most people didn't want to give out the information as required, and some of the respondents didn't decide not to participate. For example, most of the questionnaires we sent out, they were not able, the participants were not able to respond to them. So we find there are personal reasons that made them not to respond. Because one thing, you find because their families they are not aware they belong to this community, and maybe they don't want to be known. And also we find some of them are public figures, and being a public figure, they don't want to expose themselves. And also the another chart, we have the reluctance from the LGBTQ individual to identify themselves as such, so to the researchers. So when our research find, yes, they belong to this community, but they don't want to define themselves belong to this. And also the final, we find that the community in Kenya is largely cross-set because we find they are not, they don't come out to declare, so they are close community. So most of the time we find even getting this information, getting data from them is not easy. And then finally, lack of enough materials, especially no more, the research done in the continent is more minimal. So getting this research was not there, we didn't get enough research on this. Asanteni sana, I recommend. That's the end of my presentation. Back to you, Chair. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. As previously, please, if you have any questions, please hold them until the end of the sessions. We're going to have one representation, and that's by Inyama. And after then, we're going to go into a question and answer period. Inyama, Onyechi, Onyechi. Is it okay? Hi, I'm just reading your introduction. Inyama is a PhD student in the Department of African Cultural Studies with a minor in Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She specializes in transgender and sexual identities in West Africa, specifically how African expressive cultures, including fashion rituals such as clothing practices and beauty rituals across different media, shape transgender identities in Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana. Inyama, you're welcome to take the stage, and you have 20 minutes to present.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever part of the world you're joining me from. So I wouldn't be turning on my video for the purpose of a better network reception. So thank you for that generous introduction. I am Nama, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Broadly, my research is about the representation of gender minorities in the West African media, including films, literature, and social media. And a chapter of my work focuses on male Barbies, people call transgender women, popularly called male Barbies, and how they use clothing, how they use fashion practices to navigate Nigeria's, Ghana's, and Cameroon's transphobic climate. While my research is, based mostly in Nigeria, I'm also investigating gender minorities, transgender women, and non-binary people in Ghana and Cameroon to draw inferences and to make useful comparisons about the representation of transgender people in the West African media. The media has the power to bridge divides and to address misconceptions about transgender people, because religious prejudice and fundamentalism have made trans people to be portrayed in a bad light. And such problematic representations distort public ideas about who trans people are. Specifically in Nollywood, in Gollywood, and the Cameroonian film industry, trans people are demonized and portrayed as caricatures to encourage further prejudices against them. Such misinformation about trans people in the media results from sparse and limited information about their lives, which eventually fuels transphobia. In speaking with trans women and non-binary people across West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon, people like Bobrisky, people like Fola Francis, people like Shakiru, Angel Maxine, Jay Boogie. Speaking with these women, a recurring theme is this lack of representation in the history of their different countries media. And because of that, most of these women look up to the Euro-American Barbie. And in another paper, I argue that the Euro-American Barbie is a kind of queer mascot for trans women specifically, to rehistoricize their lived realities. But in this paper, I focus on reviewing the history of trans women, and in West Africa, not just not arguing for Euro-American Barbies this time. So I'm interested in reviewing the historical representations of of gender flexibility in Africa to argue that, and then I end with recommendations on how to address the patients. And I hope to highlight the exclusion of transgender people from cultural belonging and citizenship across West Africa, and to show how they face diverse barriers because of these exclusionary narratives that paint them as un-African. So while I strongly heed Jules Peterson's warning on reading specific historical individuals as trans only where the evidence is clear. And because of that, I apply a trans lens to indigenous gender identities like female husbands, male mothers, and female alafins to argue that gender bending in West Africa is not new or foreign. And my aim is to uncover gender variants that set the pace for contemporary trans identities and to dispel the myth that transgressing gender norms is new in Africa. In her book, Reinventing Africa, Ifeanyi Madumi provides an African perspective on flexible gender systems to challenge Western dual frameworks that interchange sex and gender. And she uses Nnobi in Northern Igbo land as a case study and argues that flexible gender ideologies allow females to become men, vice versa, without necessarily, being masculinized or feminized. And also asks that in most traditional Igbo societies, there are 3 different genders. And using her framework, such gender flexibility challenges the rigid Western gender system that normalizes binary gender identities as either male or female and proves the existence of gender diversity and fluid sexual identities, that transgress prescribed heterosexual gender norms in pre-colonial and colonial Africa. Wando Achebe does a CMOC in Farmers, Traders, Warriors, and Kings, a seminal text of gender and Nsukka, southeastern Nigeria. And in this text, she discusses how females in pre-colonial Nsukka transgress gender norms by exercising power and wielding control as priestesses, as farmers, as merchants. And their transgression of gender boundaries provides useful evidence, that gender and sexuality in colonial Africa are diverse and dynamic. So the question becomes, if gender and sexual identities were flexible in West Africa and are not new, why does Africa's mainstream audience construct non-normative gender identities as a colonial importation? At what point did Africans lose their history? And what factors are responsible for this erasure in cultural media? And this erasure, we can link this erasure to colonialists and early Western ethnographers who wanted to sustain the myth of Africans' backwardness and savagery. And there was no better way for them to maintain this pessimistic myth, than to construct gender and sexual diversity as unnatural, as lecherous, as barbaric, as out of place. Scholars like James Sweet have also argued that gender diversity was present in pre-colonial and colonial Africa, and that homophobia and transphobia were imported from colonial interactions. For example, the flexible gender presentation of Victoria, who was a Benin slave brought to Portuguese Azores, who insisted that she was a woman by wearing feminine dresses, challenges the pervading idea, in mainstream discourse that transgender realities are un-African. Similar to James Sweet, Cheryl Stobie provides an ethnographic account of transgendering in spiritual and healing context to highlight that gender diversity in Africa was not imported from the West. Rather, homophobia and transphobia were inherited. In my own research, my own summer research, speaking to diverse trans women and non-binary people in Nigeria, in Ghana, and in Cameroon, transgender activists and influencers, specifically in Ghana, have told me about indigenous gender bending identities, popularly called Koju Besia and Trumu Trumu, who dressed and behaved like women. One of my participants actually told me how her father shared an indigenous folktale of this gender diverse persons across Ghana's history to encourage her that transgender identities are not new in Africa, in West Africa, and that people like her have always existed. So while I implicate colonialism, in the racial and ridiculing of gender diverse identities, I try not to deny the agency of the colonized and to foreclose the possibility that, in order not to foreclose the possibility that colonized people can deploy and repurpose, colonial legacies for their selfish and private gains. And this leads me to my implication of, elite state political leaders and religious leaders and journalists and citizen journalism as well across West Africa in the region of transgender identities and lived experiences. politicians, religious leaders, editors of newspapers criminalize transgender people by co-opting the narrative, that queerness is un-African, and they co-opt such narratives to establish national sovereignty, distract citizens from economic instabilities, win elections, and punish NGOs who advocate for sexual and gender minorities. State leaders win personal favors from citizens, by punishing the likes of Bobrisky, Djibouti, and Fola Francis, and a host of others who transgress prescribed social norms and who also reject masculinity. So transgender people in West Africa are raised in a variety of cultural settings, and that is my argument for this paper, And I am arguing that institutional and social policies deny them legal citizenship and cultural belonging, and that transgender people who have been erased by oppressive mainstream narratives that argue that trans realities are new or foreign, or things that were imported into West Africa. I'm trying to say that transgender people currently, both activists, influencers, and ordinary everyday transgender people, are pushing back, that oppressive mainstream narrative that trans identities are foreign to Africa. Transgender people use expressive activism, across different media, including personal storytelling in films and in literature, and in everyday banal activities like glamorous self-styling on Instagram and Snapchat, to challenge such problematic claims and to address state policy erasure and to insist that they have the right to equity, to freedom of expression, to choice of attire, and to social justice. And the precarious position of transgender people and their diverse forms of agency used to challenge heteronormativity suggests critical place of West Africa in global dialogues about social justice. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nyoma. And now we're going to open the floor up for question and answer. So if any of the audience members in person or online have any questions, now would be the time to bring forward your question. Yes. Thank you all so much. This is really, it was really instructive and also inspiring. I have a question for for organizing chairs. I actually just wanted to understand a little better about how does the state in Nigeria define acts of affection? Like what counts as affection, basically? Okay, good question. There's been a lot of people that have like really broken down the same-sex marriage prohibition act and how like it's very contradictory in itself. So anything like many times it's not so clear, and maybe in your mind you could also give some access to this. Our work is still sitting left. But like there is being like affectionate sometimes considered like acts of affection. Being like holding people in public and things like that, and being very overtly affectionate. So for example, it's not okay in many times for women to be affectionate with each other, but if men are being affectionate to each other, then it becomes questionable and it becomes labeled as square. So, holding hands, hugging, like romanticizing, like being affectionate, physically affectionate, like touching your fellow man's face and things like that is oftentimes considered affectionate. And so because of that, many people tend to like not want to do that in public. So yeah, even like kissing too is considered being affectionate. But but speaking in terms of same-sex marriage prohibition act, like many people have also just talked about, like it focuses so much on marriage, the law itself, but because like many Nigerians have this mindset of homophobia, anything, whether it be marriage or not, they want to put it under protection. If that makes sense, yeah. And I don't know if you have anything to add about, I don't know, did you get the question?
I think I got like a glimpse of it. I think the participant was asking about like public expressions of affection. Yeah, so I think like you rightly said, in the open space that could lead to some kind of arrest, which is why in talking to the representatives at the organization, the initiative for peers in Lagos, Initiative for Equal Rights, Media representatives there have talked about like the need to have media trainings for, LGBTQI persons on how to navigate the system, how to localize, how to verbalize public affections so that you can show public affections, without being arrested by the police. But interestingly, some of the films I'm working with rather, highlights intimacies, which is something I'm trying to like foreground in my own research, because oftentimes when we talk about like LGBTQI lived reality, is always focused on trauma, right? Of course, ignoring like the place of intimacies, the place of pleasures, the place of joys. And in the films that I'm working with, and even in speaking with producers and directors of these films, there is that deliberate action to center intimacies and pleasure, in public films like he, she, they, and the rest of them. And that is so important in order not to like re-traumatize, trans people and other members of the LGBTQI community. So holding hands may not be, may lead to police arrest, but in movies help, the LGBTQI community to bypass, those strict laws that can place them in prisons, and also like YouTube and the bypass like the Nollywood, the video censors board and all of that. So it's a paradox in the way that LGBT, members of the LGBTQI community may not be able to express their love or their intimacies or their pleasures publicly across like the heteronormative society. But in movies and literature, in social media, they're doing this. And of course, these are also public spaces, right? So it's an interesting mix that they can do this, in this platforms, but it's several fashion balls. Trans people like myself who attend those fashion balls and being criminalized. So it's an
Oh, Inyama, I think we lost you there.
Oh, okay. Where did you lose me?
Oh, we just touched it for a second, but I think you were like, yeah, you just said you were giving an example of attending the balls and talking about
Yes.
the different forms of public and what is public.
Exactly. What exactly counts as public and what counts as counter public, right? At the other end. So I was trying to say that there is a paradox in these public expressions, like in person, of course, like in a heteronormative audience that are not quite educated about LGBTQI realities, that would lead to police arrest. And in having interviews with representatives, the director of Tears, there is like an ongoing push to have media trainings, for LGBTQI persons to learn how to navigate the SSMPA laws, right? And also express such that if you're arrested for maybe holding a lover or doing, when you're arrested and you go to the police station and they ask you, are you queer, are you gay, you're supposed to have a way to like localize it or vernacularize it, so in fashion balls, in possible, and even in several films, those are also public because everybody can access YouTube films, right? So those are also, they are bypassing, for instance, the national censors board, but they are putting these films on YouTube, and that's also public. So these expressions of intimacies and pleasure all boils down to like what constitutes public and what also constitutes counter public. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nyama. Any other questions from anyone?
One question for Neoma at the moment. Can you please tell us more about the historically transgender case you found in Ghana or you mentioned in your talk? You told us that you had your survey in Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon.
Right.
And you especially mentioned that there was I believe there was a royal family, the father told the daughter that transgender is not new in the Ghanaian history. Will you please share more about this particular part to elaborate on this for us, please?
Okay, right. So I was speaking to Angel Maxine, who is a transgender activist in Ghana, but unfortunately had to migrate to Berlin because of the transphobia in Ghana, and then the recently passed anti-LGBT bill. And I asked her about, during the interview process, I asked her about her childhood. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me what growing up was like for you. Tell me about, did you see yourself in the media? Did you see people like you in the media? And that was when she told me that the indigenous gender bending identities, who are popularly called Kojo Besia and Trumu Trumu. And she explained to me that these terms are like slurs. They're like popular slurs used by several Ghanaians to caricature and, oppress people who dress like women, who behave like women, in certain parts of Ghana. And she actually mentioned that there is actually a community where these people live, and that she actually took a journey there one time. She actually left Accra, Ghana, to go to this part of Ghana where these people live, to feel a certain kind of like belongingness, right? So, and then she also shared that while growing up, too, she tried to buttress that growing up was not repressive, that she didn't grow in a repressive childhood, environment. That was when she came into the public, when she started attending universities, and that she realized that people are actually transphobic, but in her own direct home, she didn't suffer that kind of discrimination. And then she relayed to me that her father, so she's not actually from a royal family, because I think I heard you mention something like that. So she actually told me that her father shared this indigenous folk tale, of gender diverse persons across Ghana's history. And these people, this folk tale centered these people that are popularly called Kuju Besia and Trumu Trumu, right? So the father told her that, see, you don't have to feel ashamed, you don't have to feel bad for being effeminate, or wanting to dress like a woman, or saying that I feel like I'm a woman on the inside, because Kojo Besia and Trumu Trumu have always like existed, right? And so this was an indigenous folk tale that helped to center transgender realities in Ghana, even before we have it in contemporary forms of media. So our father was trying to encourage that transgender identities are not new in West Africa, because that's the narrative that is being pushed currently, that this is a colonial importation, this is foreign, this is out of place, this is something that you got from watching maybe Star World or any of those foreign media spaces. So my father was trying to encourage that people like you have always existed. And not only have they existed, they have been centered in indigenous folk tales. And not only have they been centered in indigenous folk tales, they also have their spaces, in Ghana, which is why Angel Maxine took that trip from Accra, Ghana, which is, I think, a more transphobic space, to another part of Ghana where these people called Kojo Besia and Trumu Trumu live. And her experience there was that she didn't want to go back to Accra, Ghana. She wanted to stay there because people like her, existed. And she was very amazed to see that they were not just only young people, they were older people there. So meaning that they have, existed across, history. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the explanation of the case. And I also have a question for all of the three speakers. That is, we have case studies from you, which are very, inspiring and wonderful. And we can see that you conducted your research in different regions in Africa. So if you can put African onto this panel, can we also divide this African communities of our queer friends or LGBTQIA 2S+ friends? Can we also discuss about regional differences of the attitudes or the social stress in different regions, such as the West Africa and the East Africa? Do we have any observations or discussions in this forum?
Okay, thank you for your question. Given that Durag wasn't answered any question yet, would you like to give it a first go? Durag, are you still with us?
I was not able to understand the question. Maybe you can repeat the question. Sorry.
Just for me,
Just to shorten my question, yes. Because sir, you're based in Nairobi, or we say East Africa, and the other two of our speakers were or are based in Nigeria, or they had their survey in West Africa. So can we form a comparison on the social attitudes or stress on the issues we address today? What are the differences you see from East African people towards our queer friends from the West?
Thank you so much for that question. There's some differences. One, in East Africa, we are so much outspoken on queer people. For example, in Uganda, you have a law. It's already criminal in Uganda. In Kenya, you don't have a law, but it's a criminal in a way. But you don't have a law in place that forbid queer people. In Rwanda, also you don't have a law. It's silent, but also is a criminal in a way. But now, when you go to West Africa, there's another thing you find the region. When you go to Muslim countries, the religion is another perspective they look. They are not open on it compared to where you have Christian community. Another perspective is economical status. You find more so in East Africa, people are more empowered, and the more empowered people are, they are joining the queer. So there are a lot of comparison that we can make on this. The other thing that can make us see the biggest difference and why people are practicing it more in East Africa than Western Africa is because of the influences there and openness. For example, there's democracy space in Kenya. So anybody can go out there in social media, in mainstream media and talk about it. So, and also in Uganda, people are going or go so do demonstration on the streets. When they do demonstration, everybody is able to come out and declare they are queer people. But compared to other countries in West Africa where they cannot go out on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
thank you so much. Do you have anything to add to it before coming?
Well, not really. I'm not an expert on East Africa, but I think I read one of Daringo's paper one time, and I think it focused on music, as a form of expressive activism. So I would say something that also differs is, the form of media that is being used to as a tool for, anti-LGBTQ expression. So in Lagos, Lagos Echo for show. Lagos is a city that's bubbly, lively, and also imbued with, fashion, ethics, and all that. So a form of expressive activism, in Lagos, Nigeria, and even in other parts of Nigeria that I've visited, is that they use fashion, they use clothing practices, they use rituals, bodily rituals, to push back against LGBTQ oppression. But in East Africa, based on the Daringo paper, music is the form. So I think something else that would differ is the form of media that is being used to push back against LGBTQ oppression. Yeah.
Thank you, Norma. And I'm just going to add to that. I think, as you both have mentioned, economics plays a role, social acceptance plays a role. I think urbanization and urbanism also plays a role because when we have more quote-unquote international Western presence in places, for example, Lagos, social acceptance is different in Lagos than would be in somewhere more rural, say, Oyo State or Osun State, or even in the northern parts of Nigeria, say, Kano or other more rural areas. So I think organization plays a role into the social acceptance of poor people, given that when there's more international presence, quote-unquote Western presence too, I think it also changes people's attention to queerness or acceptance for queerness in West Africa, so to say. Do we have any other questions from the audience members or anyone online?
I have a question.
Oh, okay, I'm going to take one from the audience and then we'll come to anyone. Was you that said you had a question?
Oh, yes, I have a question.
Yeah, okay, so I will take the audience and then we'll come to your man. Thank you. Good afternoon. So, Nova, this is for you. You mentioned the media. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So you mentioned the media. What do you have to say about, how the media influences, the public perception? We know
Yeah.
that narrative influences perception, influences judgment, and everything. So I know that there is an erasure, about the representing queer identities in the media. But what do you say about when that representation is negative? Like, portraying a queer character as evil, or like, and also you said about Bobrisky about how she uses, the trans identity to make money by commodification. So, like, that is a negative representation because you also mentioned that if, we're represented that way, it creates some form of, like, it makes it seem as if your identity is not genuine. You just doing it to make money. So it's a narrative. Oh, he dressed like a girl because he wants to make money. You need to be said something. If you are sharing free food and they say it's only for women, all the men to dress as women. So I feel like that also creates a form of, it makes the queer identity or the transgender identity makes it superficial, makes it false, represents as false. So what do you say about that, kind of representation? Even in the media, like in films, you present the queer character as maybe someone who wants to use it to make money, prostitution. Oh, I got into this because I wanted money. Or I got into because I wanted to leave the country. That also a narrative like that. So that, that shapes, some form of perception in the mind of, the, the country, everybody in the country. So what do you say about that? When that representation is negative? Because if that's what we are getting, what then happens? So that's my question. Thank you. Sure. Okay.
Oh,
Do you want to
okay.
go first?
Okay, maybe I could jump in and then you go to Oyinda. Because Oyinda, I mean, she framed it really well as a rainbow capitalism, right? If I heard that correctly. In interviewing Bobrisky, in speaking with Bobrisky, in representing Bobrisky in this project, I'm very careful about representing Bobrisky because the work Bobrisky is doing, it's it's paradoxical in several ways. But I'm also, while I understand that Bobrisky uses this to make money as any influencer would, right? I mean, influencers make money off like social media. That's what influencers do, right? Even like heterosexual influencers. I'm also very careful because the work Bobrisky is doing is not just related to class, not just related to money. It's also related to her, like there's that intersection. We have to like factor intersectionality when representing Bobrisky. Like we also have to factor in her Muslim identity. We also have to factor in her her Yoruba Muslim identity, which is an ethnic identity. We also have to factor in her gender identity. We also have to factor in, several other things. So for instance, in one of the movies I'm working with rather, or several movies that Bobrisky stars, there is something very interesting that she does. So she starts out this movie as a transgender character, representing a transgender woman. And she uses like bodily rituals and beauty practices to present herself that way. And then towards the end of the movie, Bobrisky will revert to masculinity, and it's not easy. So I think kind of double-edged. They're kind of a double-edged sword. Sensitive in the sense of transgender realities as jocular, as deceptive, as tricksters. But Bobrisky is doing this she's restricted or she's limited by several factors. For instance, in those movies, she and the producer of that movie have had to bypass the National Census Board in order to put those movies out. In order to bypass, one way to bypass the Census Board and to have the movie out is to revert to masculinity, right? So on the one hand, Bobrisky is, reinforcing, negative stereotypes about transgender people as people who are all about money. But on the other end, the fact that she is visible in some scenes in this movie as a transgender woman is also consolidating visibility. And also, in speaking to members of the LGBTQI community to assess how they, because I'm doing like a kind of audience reception of these movies. And I'm asking this week, what do you think about Bobrisky in these movies? Go and watch this movie and come back and tell me what you think about this movie. And then they come back and say, well, we know that she's promoting these negative stereotypes, but we're also grateful to her that she's there, as a kind of pace setter, as a kind of forerunner. Because Bobrisky somehow, I mean, across she's not the first, because I'm also looking at the archives, right, to see the representation. She's not the first to come out and say in Nigeria that I'm a woman. You have other people like Calypso King and all that. But Bobrisky is the first in contemporary time to come out and, identify herself in this way. So on the one hand, based on audience reception, so I'm giving you audience reception feedback. On the one hand, they're saying, yes, she's presenting us in this way. But on the other hand, we are grateful that she's consolidating visibility, by being there, right? So I think it's a double-edged sword. And I think I also argue for it by talking about the paradox of, increased visibility and how visibility can be a farce, in the sense that sometimes even with increased visibility like Bobrisky, other ordinary citizens, other ordinary transgender people um, are also suffering. I think that's what Oyinda talks about. I mean, commodification does not always equal safety. But on the other hand, something Bobrisky is also helping the trans community to do is in terms of aspirational labor, right? Helping them to aspire, to be this person who can take up space, and be the best version of themselves. Yeah.
Thank you. I think
Thank you.
Better. And I think, that's why my presentation said it's not a question of right or wrong, it's a question of survival. Because when survival is at the brink of everything, we can't really question that. It becomes hard to question and dissect when a person else is still alive. Because even cisgender heterosexual people commercialize their own sexuality and their own genders every time to survive. So who are we to judge a trans woman for commercializing our own identity for survival too? Because at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society that everybody has to survive in. So when survival is on the table, it becomes hard to question right or wrong. It goes back to the question of survival. And as Matt said, if you go in the streets of Lagos, if you go in the market to the other people who don't have access to the big name textbooks, it's Bobrisky they know. Bobrisky becomes this person of contact to understand queerness in a country where queerness has become so demonized and so leveled as this Western notion. Again, when the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act was passed in 2014, it was passed as this, it's an anti-Western resistance, because in 2014 was when there was this big movement to legalize square marriages across the world, and Obama was in many times convinced trying to get many African leaders to legalize same-sex marriages. And this Goodluck Jonathan was passed this as a way to put a stance against anti-colonial, anti-Western influences. So Bobrisky becomes this notion of understanding, interacting with awareness, because we don't really see awareness every day represented in Nigerian media and Nigerian culture. And access is really important when people don't have access to education or access to video and textbooks or access to even Western media. It becomes important, as Nyama said, to see someone that looks like you, represents themselves, live their life truthfully in their identity and in their truth. So that would be the pros of having people like Risky, because it helps when they become visibility. I mean, it helps when they become more visible. Also, I know that question was like media. But this is just like the reference. Oh, okay. Like general films that we watch. Because people have more access to that than Risky even. Because like you said, we YouTube by thousands of this Nollywood blogs and everything. So like, what you have to say about the negative representation or queer identity is really. Well, it's always going to be problematic, because I just watched, I don't know if this is one of the films that we studied, but I just watched my Ghetto, the first one, and one of the scenes in there, that you have the area boys that are basically abusing Bobrisky for wanting to be trans, and they're going off and talking about how they're going to be told Bobrisky, and Bobrisky has to act this act where she's kneeling down there, begging them and taking in all their abuse. And I was really I was, and on one hand concerned, on the other hand, I was like, the question of survival, right? Obviously, money to survive in the society and this is disability. So, given the notions of how we see queerness in Nigeria, the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Acts, how people are, again, given, for example, one of the speakers, the younger last best, as we know, she got arrested and it created all this controversy. These negative things are there because that's what people believe and that's what we want to see, and that's what people to self-films. And also, this caricature negative representations of queer people in media also brings is another form of rage baiting because many producers know that Nigerians tend to be homophobic. So when you have this thing that is promoting homophobia and transphobia in your film too, it becomes a way of also selling. So this is another form of communication, negative communication. It becomes a way of selling and also selling awareness from your negative light. So of course, those people are also not kind of commodifying trustless and awareness in that sense, but it's all negative representation. This is part of the problem, right? It's one thing to say to get rid of the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act, but at the end of the day, we have to change those attitudes. And if the filmmakers are not willing to make this change in the film that is accessible to everybody, how are we going to get to a world where people are not discriminated against, criminalized against because of their gender or sexual identity? So it's a huge issue that it's not just one law or one policy is going to change it. It's a long, it's a culture, a need for cultural change, a need for societal change, and I don't know if or when we're ever going to get there. But I have hopes that with increased visibility. We just had the first ever Pride in Lagos a few weeks ago, so we're getting there slowly and steadily. But it's important that we're going past Lagos, we're going past people who have access to these basics and going to the people who don't have access to education in this space. I just want to take the question on stage and then we'll come to you. So, hi, Inirago and Yoma. We have a question on the screen. The question says, thank you for your work. Could the presenters speak to if and how queer folks look to particular figures or movements in other parts of the continent, either in self-styling or in terms of politics? If so, are there some examples? I think Yoma kind of answered this when she was talking about examples of in Ghana media. And Yoma, do you have any short answer you want to add to this question?
Sure, I can answer a very short answer. One thing, the queer people, they are creating a movement of their own by registered NGOs, non-governmental organizations. That's why they are starting. And these are movements they are making in countries and also going to continental level. So they are making a movement, movement and that kind of scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Nyoma, do you have anything to add to that question?
Oh yes. So they're also looking beyond, I think even beyond like different parts of Africa, they're also looking to Euro-America for inspiration in terms of styling. And I think that's where I talk about like how male Barbies, these women called male Barbies, quote and unquote, are kind of use European fashion practices, and in that way they kind of localize it or vernacularize it in ways that makes their diasporic audience and even their local audience to draw ideas of race. Because I'm speaking to some of these women and asking them, for instance, why do you prefer the Peruvian wig over like your natural hair and all that? And they come up with statements like, what I wear is not what like limits me to be like, what I wear on my hair, what kind of wig I wear does not make me less African, right? It may make me less black or whatever, but it does not make me aspire to whiteness or ideal white femininity. So there are ways in which they are drawing inspiration from Euro-American beauty practices, but they are localizing it, they are vernacularizing it, and which is why I often talk about the male Barbie, the Barbie as a kind of queer mascot through which transgender women represent their local lived reality. So beyond Africa, they're also looking to Euro-America, but they're also positioning themselves as local cosmopolitans, right? In that sense, yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, like, and one of the things I also use my analysis to join comparison between Bobrisky and RuPaul, because I think like Bobrisky is also kind of doing something similar to what RuPaul did, because of RuPaul, like drag has become more commercialized in North America. And I think like because of Bobrisky too, more and more people have a better understanding of trans women. And so I would like to imagine that Bobrisky probably draws some inspirations from RuPaul. Bobrisky is also living as I think that example very localized in the Nigerian context. Her skits are very Nigerian, and a Nigerian person is that cultural context of this dance street and understand how she talks to people, how she interacts, and how she creates content for social media. Your question.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or about so, concerning what you said on negativity on social media. So, for me, I think it's a form of balance in humanity, sense of both good and bad. That no matter the movements, because one thing I've said about movements is that we're always sharing the good side, the good side, like the black movement or any of the feminism. There's more of the good sides, which we portray the good sides, and we neglect the negative side of it. And what I mean is, for the current parts now, there are some cases whereby we have issues of maybe a loss of the man to protect somebody about these things, but they are not being spoken about because I don't know why. So I feel maybe the negative part is just a reflection of that balance that there's both good and bad of this community in this community.
Yes, so right differently to give that balance,
To be honest,
because people who don't know the beyond the questions, the right stage that the negative aspects of the LGBTQI in the person. That's it. So, yeah, we should stick to the one aspect.
I'm just going to respond, and in your mind, did you hear the question? The statement.
I'm not sure. I think maybe you could help articulate the question or reframe it, please.
Basically, the participant was saying that the negative representations of queerness in media are important because we should have balance in society. Was basically a summary of what they said. Another participant was responding on why they felt we need to make specific examples about rape culture and using that to talk about the negative aspects of queerness. I think like when someone's life is at risk, of imminent danger and prosecution and hate, we need to be conscious about how we represent those communities and those people. And so because of that, I think the negative representations of queer people in media is very problematic because at the end of the day, it trickles down to encouraging more people to promote violence against them. And that is a problem. Queer people are doing this. They're regular people like you and I, and they deserve to have safety in society. And so when we're constantly portraying them in this negative light, it creates this notion of stereotypes and hatred in people's mind. And the average person who doesn't necessarily have a cultural understanding or contextual understanding or knowledge about understanding human rights and respecting human rights. All of this things it gives more fuel to whatever negative stereotypes they have in their heads. So it's important that we're not trailing this negative representations. I see your argument about negative pros and cons, but at the end of the day, when someone's human rights and their livelihood and their personal life is in danger, we should shape away from negative representations at all times.
But because those negative representations, they go beyond the frequencies.
They go beyond the average person.
Yeah,
I'm coming from.
Not a quality.
Yeah, exactly. That's the part I'm talking about that. Okay, for instance, whereby in a movie whereby the first person, is the antagonist in the movie. There can be that argument that what is the problem between the antagonist role, and then there can be a movement that no, you guys are trying to kick against this movement.
Yeah.
And people are not seeing it as it's just a human thing. Like this is not based on gender.
Yeah, but did you hear what she said? She said we exist in a society where we have more negative perception than positive. So why do you now feel the need to make the queer idea? Why are you trying to promote those negative things and then putting it under the queer umbrella instead of under the human, like I don't know. Okay.
I just want to add to, like, in the United States, for example, where there's so much anti-Black racism and there's a lot of negative representations of minoritized racial populations, whereas those are not true. And yes, balance is good in a vacuum, but in reality, when people are being demonized for who they are, whether it's race, gender, sexual identity, this becomes a big problem. So just to take it out of the queer umbrella, but to think about other minoritized identities, such as race or gender.
For example, how in movies they show Black people as very violent, always, crime. It's negative representation, and it has formed a stereotype when that is not even true. Violence exists beyond race. Human beings are
Or if
violent.
you think of like country perceptions, for example, now many times in the media, Nigeria is represented as this very violent country where you're not safe in Nigeria, and that's the danger of the one story that is being told. So if we only focus on one type of story, again, we only create this perception, and that fits into negative stereotypes over and over again.
I think that one of the types of stories that we hear so often is one that we're also hearing in this demo, which is about like extreme question of survival and death, which is very real in this country, but it's also not the only story. So even though I'm not necessarily in agreement that we need to give negative portrayals of things, I do think complex portrayals are really important. And one place I'd like to see more nuance, or like since we have such a rich dialogue going, like moving forward, I think the idea that Lagos is the place where acceptance happens, I think visibility happens in Lagos, and that's very much funded by all of the different consulates that are very happy, by the way, to host Pride organizations for many years now. And everyone has to claim that it's the first Pride because that's the way to sell a narrative, in part to foreign audiences who are invested in a victim story about what's going on in their communities here. When in fact, that's happening alongside so much more. Like the art plane is thriving with queer communities that are living fully complex and interesting lives. So I think as I hear, like the danger of a single story is very real, but I also want to caution us as researchers from overemphasizing the risks that these communities are facing and losing the other parts of their story that inform the very different risks that they face. And also the opportunities for acceptance and growth that happen not only in Lagos in kind of globally legible terms of Pride celebrations, but in other kinds of communities that might not look like queer acceptance or might not have the LGBTQ label on them, but are just as important and in some ways more optimistic for me to find.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I think what's interesting with that point too, with the consulates and like quote unquote like global north funding these kinds of like rainbow capitalism celebrations. I was having conversations with friends in Abidjan and Cote d'Ivoire about this, where they're like, oh, why are you like promoting and importing this? Because in fact, in the United States is super transphobic, super homophobic. There's laws in place that are just as violent as in other countries. So I think it's a question too of like you mentioned, things get a little more complex. It's not necessarily about import export, but how is queer culture localized? How is it like in different environments, different places?
And thank you for your point. And like I think that I heard this in Myanmar's work too. And we only have 3 minutes left in the panel, so if you have a quick 30 seconds to add to this, you're welcome to. But yes, it's something I try to be as conscious about too, and I try to shift away from telling narratives of like suffering, which is why I try to focus on like what is the day-to-day survival like, and like how what is for enjoying like again, as you said, there's a lot of like stuff with again in Western media too, there's a lot of like extremely amount of people killed every day, extremely people are not safe in such nature. Many of them navigate these spaces as their everyday life. So thank you for that point and for the reminder. And do you have any quick 30 seconds to add to this before we go?
Yeah. I wanted to say thank you to participants who said that we have to be very cautious about overemphasizing risk, which is what I'm like going away from. But in speaking to organizations like TIERS, they are saying that the West and the funding that comes from the West, because they lack local funding, is what is pushing most of these narratives to center on suffering. Because even myself, when applying for like project funds and these Western houses, they say, oh, where's the suffering? Where's the trauma? And I'm like, I know there's trauma, but I don't want to focus on the trauma. I'm focusing on intimacy, pleasures, and joy. And surprisingly, you don't get those funding. So it can be very tricky. So it's like, despite like not having those kind of funding, I've stuck to the fact that I have to represent and nuance the lived realities of these people, the people I'm working with, because it's not just about trauma, it's not just about pain, it's not just about, all that, or risk and all that, survival. It's also about joy, it's also about laughter, it's also about intimacy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I really enjoyed the conversation that we had today. All of our emails are on the program, so if you'd like to connect with us outside of this, do reach out to us if you have any questions too. Thank you so much for sticking to the panel, for your amazing questions. I really appreciate that, Dem. I think we had a really rich conversation. So thank you so much. Thank you, Unyama, and we'll be connected later. And
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yinda. Thank you. Thank you, Daringo.